Morgan's cologne lingered in the air long after he'd left our apartment, our home, for the last time. I sat motionless on the edge of our bed, his side already stripped bare, staring at the half-empty closet where custom suits worth more than my student loan payments had hung just hours before. The message on my phone glowed with cruel finality. I deserve someone who understands my world. Vanessa gets me in ways you never could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 12 years together, gone in a text message. I picked up the framed photo from our nightstand, Morgan in his tailored Armani at last year's company fundraiser, his arm around my waist, my modest navy dress suddenly looking cheap through my tears. The woman who'd replaced me had been in that photo too, standing just out of frame, her designer gown and industry connections making her impossible to ignore. Vanessa Rydell, tech royalty, everything I wasn't. You'll never belong in his world, my mother had warned when Morgan and I first met in graduate school. Back then, he was just a brilliant computer science student with ambition burning in his eyes, and I was the environmental science major, who helped him develop sustainable technology concepts. We were equals then. At least that's what I'd believed. The buzzing of my phone interrupted my spiral. It wasn't Morgan, of course it wasn't. Julia, are you okay? I just heard. Tess's voice carried the weight of genuine concern. My oldest friend since our undergraduate days, the only person who'd warned me about the lingering glances between Morgan and Vanessa at industry functions. He's gone, Tess. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Packed his things this morning, while I was at the conservation lab. Left his keys and a text message. That absolute bastard. The venom in her voice almost made me smile. Almost. Where are you? I'm coming over. An hour later, Tess sat across from me at the kitchen island, pouring generous glasses of the expensive Merlot Morgan had been saving for a special occasion. Her dark curls were still damp from the rain outside, her makeup-free face fierce with loyalty. 12 years, I whispered, staring into the deep red liquid. And he couldn't even end it face to face. Because he's a coward, Tess said flatly, reaching across to grasp my hand. A pathetic, social climbing coward who's about to discover exactly what he's lost. I laughed bitterly. What he's lost? Tess, he's traded up. Everyone knows it. The environmental consultant marrying the tech CEO was cute when we were both building our careers, but now I gestured around at my modestly furnished apartment. Morgan's the founder of Greensphere Tech, and Vanessa is the daughter of Rydelcor's CEO and a VP there herself. So that's it? You're just going to let him walk away after 12 years? After everything you've done for him? Tess's eyes narrowed. Who helped develop the initial sustainability algorithms that launched Greensphere? Who spent nights and weekends coding with him when he couldn't afford to hire programmers? Who connected him with the environmental agencies that gave his startup credibility? I stared into my untouched wine, each word hitting like a precision strike, but I couldn't muster the energy to feel angry. The hollow feeling was too consuming. It doesn't matter anymore, I finally said. Morgan made his choice. Tess slammed her glass down with surprising force. You know what matters? That major government contract he's pitching next week. The carbon capture integration for the aerospace industry that you essentially designed. The fact that half of Silicon Valley thinks he's a green tech visionary because you've been his uncredited environmental science consultant for a decade. I flinched. The aerospace contract, Morgan's crowning achievement. The project that had finally put him in the same room as Vanessa Rydell on a regular basis. The irony wasn't lost on me. What's your point, Tess? That I helped build my own replacement? My point is that Morgan Chen isn't half the environmental tech wizard everyone thinks he is, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. and maybe it's time they all learned that. I should have shut down the conversation there, should have thanked her for the wine and the sympathy and sent her home. That's what the old Julia would have done. The supportive wife, the team player, the woman who'd spent 12 years helping a man achieve his dreams while quietly shelving her own. Instead, I took my first sip of Morgan's prized Merlot and said, "I'm listening." Tess leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. What do you know about Vanessa Rydell beyond the obvious?" I shrugged. Stanford MBA, family money. Her father founded Rydell Corp. She's been fast-tracked since joining. 3 years ago. Everyone treats her like she walks on water. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. That's the public profile, but people like that always have secrets. Tess pulled out her phone. My brother Jake works in tech journalism. He's been tracking the Rydell family for years. There are rumors that not all of their Fortune 500 success was built through strictly legal channels. I frowned. Even if that's true, what does it have to do with me? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Tess's fingers flew across her screen. The point is, knowledge is power. And right now, you need every advantage you can get. Something cold and unfamiliar uncurled in my chest, a sensation I'd never allowed myself to feel before. 12 years of supporting, accommodating, understanding. 12 years of shrinking myself to fit into Morgan's world. And for what? "I need to know everything," I said quietly. "About both of them." Tess's smile widened. "Now you're thinking clearly. But first things first. You need to secure yourself. Financially. Joint accounts, credit cards, investments. What's the situation?" The question snapped me back to practical reality. We have a joint checking account for household expenses, but most of our savings are in separate accounts. I'm still on our shared credit card, the one with the airline miles. I paused, thinking. His name is on the apartment lease, but I've made every payment for the past 2 years. Digital files, cloud accounts, email. I blinked. We share a cloud drive for household documents, and I know all his passwords. I set them up. He could never remember them. A small, humorless laugh escaped me. Good. That's very good. Tess reached for her purse, pulling out a sleek laptop. Let's start there. Every email, every document, every financial record. If it's in a shared digital space, we need to archive it now before he remembers to change the passwords. Is that legal? I hesitated, my ingrained rule-following instincts flaring up. Completely. These are accounts you legitimately have access to, containing information relevant to your relationship and joint finances. Her eyes met mine. But we should move quickly. Men like Morgan have a way of rewriting history once they've decided to move on. 3 hours and 2 bottles of wine later, we had systematically downloaded 5 years of emails, financial statements, text messages, and calendar entries from every account I had legitimate access to. The meticulous organization that had made me an excellent environmental researcher served me well as I cataloged everything into clearly labeled folders. I still don't see how any of this helps me, I said, rubbing my tired eyes. So I have proof he's been planning to leave me for months. So what? Tess was scrolling through a series of email exchanges between Morgan and the aerospace contract team. Julia, she said slowly, have you actually read these environmental compliance documents? The ones Morgan's been working on? Not closely. He just needed me to help with the technical framework and verify the carbon capture projections. Why? Because I'm no environmental scientist, but even I can see that something about these impact statements doesn't add up. She pointed to a spreadsheet attachment. Look at these emissions reduction forecasts. They're impossibly optimistic. I frowned, scanning the numbers with my researcher's precision. Tess was right. The projected carbon offsets were wildly inflated, beyond any reasonable scientific expectation. That can't be right, I murmured, diving deeper into the attached files. The government would never approve these projections if they saw the underlying data. Unless they never see the underlying data, Tess said grimly. Is it possible Morgan's doctoring the numbers to make this contract look better than it is? He wouldn't... I started automatically, then stopped myself. The Morgan I thought I knew wouldn't have ended our 12-year relationship with a text message either. Let me see the original research models. As the night deepened around us, I lost myself in what I did best, environmental data analysis, and what I found made my blood run cold. Layer upon layer of manipulated projections, hidden emissions calculations, and misleading carbon offset analyses. The aerospace integration wasn't the green revolution Morgan was presenting to the government. It was an environmental disaster, disguised as innovation. He's gambling with the entire company's reputation, I whispered, horrified. If these projections fail, and they will, Greensphere could face lawsuits, regulatory investigations, maybe even criminal charges. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And who signed off on all this creative accounting? Tess asked pointedly. The answer hit me like a physical blow as I checked the document properties. Vanessa Rydell. Her digital signature is on every draft. Well, Tess leaned back, a strange light in her eyes. It seems your replacement might not be the ecotech genius everyone thinks she is either. Or she knows exactly what she's doing, I countered, a new thought forming. What if the aerospace contract isn't what it appears to be? What if there's another agenda entirely? Tess raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I need to make some calls, I said, reaching for my phone. There's someone who might be able to help us understand what's really happening here. At 2 a.m.? Tess asked skeptically. No, but first thing tomorrow. I stood up, a strange calm settling over me. Eric Zhang from the Environmental Protection Agency. We dated briefly before I met Morgan. He's now in their enforcement division. The EPA guy? Tess's eyes widened. Julia, what exactly are you planning? I looked around the apartment. That suddenly felt like a monument to my own naive devotion. 12 years of supporting a man who couldn't even face me when he left. 12 years of being the perfect partner, only to be discarded when someone more convenient, more connected came along. I'm not planning anything yet, I said carefully, but Morgan and Vanessa have made a critical error in judgment. What's that? Tess asked. I smiled for the first time that day, a small, cold expression that felt foreign on my face. They think I'm irrelevant, just the discarded wife who'll quietly disappear while they build their perfect power couple narrative. I picked up our wedding photo, Morgan's confident smile now looking smug and calculating. But they've forgotten something important. What's that? I'm the one who knows where all the environmental skeletons are buried. I set the photo face down on the counter, turning my back on 12 years of memories. And I think it's time to start digging. The next morning dawned with merciless brightness, sunlight streaming through curtains I'd forgotten to close. My head throbbed from the wine and revelations of the previous night, but underlying the physical discomfort was something new, a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Tess. Coffee and strategy session at 10, bringing reinforcements. Before I could reply, another notification appeared, an email from Greensphere Tech's HR department. The subject line was brutally concise. Benefit status change request. Morgan was having me removed from his company health insurance and benefits less than 24 hours after walking out. Something cold and hard crystallized in my chest as I stared at the screen. Whatever lingering doubts I might have had about Tess's suggested course of action evaporated in that moment. I typed a quick response to her text. My place, 10 a.m., bring everything you've got. Then I opened my laptop and began methodically downloading every remaining document from our shared cloud storage. The time for hesitation was over. Morgan had declared war with a text message and an HR email, and I was finally ready to fight back. Precisely at 10 a.m., 3 sharp knocks echoed through my apartment. Tess wasn't alone. Behind her stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair and calculating eyes that missed nothing as they swept over my living room. "Julia, this is Jake." "Chen, my brother from Tech Truth News," Tess said, closing the door behind them. "Jake, this is Julia." Jake nodded, extending his hand. I've been following the Rydell family for years. When Tess told me what happened, I knew I had to help. I gestured toward the dining table, now covered with printouts of environmental data I'd spent the morning analyzing. "I appreciate it, but I'm still not sure what we're doing here. Even if the aerospace contract projections are manipulated, what does that have to do with me?" Jake set his leather briefcase on the table. "Everything, potentially. May I?" He gestured to the documents. I nodded, watching as he methodically scanned through the spreadsheets, his expression growing increasingly interested. "These projections aren't just optimistic," he finally said. "They're deliberately misleading. The question is, why? Who benefits if this aerospace contract goes through despite being built on false environmental claims? Greensphere and Morgan get the credit for bringing in a major government deal," I offered. "Yes, but there's more." Jake pulled out his laptop. "The Rydell family has been divesting from certain sectors very strategically over the past year, and one of those sectors is traditional aerospace tech, particularly companies that would be directly affected if this green integration fails." My researcher's brain clicked the pieces together. They're selling before the contract implementation fails, and stock values tank. Exactly. Jake's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a journalist onto something big. Classic pump and dump. Use inflated environmental projections to drive up values, sell your holdings before reality catches up, then watch from a safe distance as everyone else takes the hit. "But that's securities fraud," Tess finished, setting 3 mugs of coffee on the table. "And your husband and his new girlfriend are right in the middle of it," Jake said. I absorbed this, thinking of all the times Morgan had insisted we couldn't afford certain expenses: my advanced degree courses, repairs to my aging car, conservation conference fees, all while he was potentially involved in securities fraud. "What's our approach?" I asked finally. Jake leaned forward. "What if there was a way to stop the aerospace contract and expose the Rydell family without putting you in the line of fire?" My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Morgan. "Need aerospace presentation files by EOD. Password changed on Dupper Cloud Drive. Email them to work address." No greeting, no acknowledgement of our shattered relationship. Just a demand for the files I'd helped create. I showed the message to Tess and Jake. "The audacity," Tess seethed. But Jake was thoughtful. "This could be our opening. You still have access to these presentation files." "Of course, I practically built them." I pulled up the sleek slide deck on my laptop. "Morgan may be the face of the aerospace contract, but I'm the one who organized all the environmental data and created the visuals. And if those visuals were to show the actual projections instead of the manipulated ones..." Jake let the thought hang. I stared at him. "You want me to sabotage the presentation?" "Not sabotage," Jake corrected. "Correct. Replace the false data with accurate projections based on the underlying numbers. Let the government representatives see the truth about what they're being asked to approve." Tess's eyes widened. "Julia, this is perfect. Morgan would be humiliated in front of the entire government committee." But I was already shaking my head. "They'd know immediately it was me. I'd be legally liable." "Not if we're careful," Jake countered. "The modifications would simply restore accurate data that's already in Greensphere's systems, just hidden under layers of manipulation." I thought about it. I could embed the original source data links in the presentation instead of the doctored spreadsheets. When Morgan clicks to show the projections, he'll be presenting the real numbers without even realizing it. It's elegant, Jake admitted, but there's another angle here that might be even more powerful. We both looked at him expectantly. I have a source at the EPA who's already been looking into some of the Rydell family's more questionable corporate environmental practices. What if, instead of just embarrassing Morgan at the government meeting, we feed this information to the right investigators? That would take longer, Tess pointed out. Yes, but the impact would be far greater. Jake turned to me. The choice is yours, Julia. Quick revenge or long-term justice. I stared at the text from Morgan, the man who'd shared my bed for 12 years, but couldn't even bother with basic courtesy now that I'd served my purpose. Why choose? I said finally. Let's do both. 2 hours later, Jake left with copies of all the relevant documents, heading straight to his EPA contact. Tess and I sat at my dining table, methodically working through the aerospace presentation. You realize, Tess said as she helped me embed the accurate data sources, that this won't just embarrass Morgan, it might end his career at Greensphere. I know. My fingers paused over the keyboard. Am I a terrible person for doing this? Tess gave me a level look. Is Morgan a terrible person for throwing away 12 years with a text message? Is Vanessa terrible for helping orchestrate environmental fraud that could cost taxpayers millions and potentially harm the environment? You're not the villain in this story, Julia. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Morgan. Still waiting on those files. Need them ASAP. I took a deep breath and hit send on the email I'd prepared. The modified presentation was now in Morgan's hands. In 3 days, he would stand before the Government Contract Committee and unknowingly present the truth about the aerospace integration. What now? Tess asked. Now, I said, closing my laptop. We prepare for Phase 2. The next morning, I walked into Greensphere Tech's gleaming headquarters for the first time in months. As an environmental researcher at a conservation nonprofit, I rarely had reason to visit Morgan's workplace. Today, however, I had manufactured one. Julia Chen to see Diane Patterson, HR director, I told the receptionist, keeping my voice steady. I have an appointment regarding benefit transitions. The receptionist's expression flickered with recognition and pity. News of Morgan's sudden departure from our marriage had clearly made the rounds. Of course, Mrs. Chen, 15th floor. She's expecting you. I nodded my thanks, ignoring the curious glances that followed me to the elevator. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been to countless Greensphere social events as Morgan's wife, yet this was only my second time visiting the actual offices. Morgan had always preferred to keep our professional lives separate. Now I understood why. Diane Patterson's office was a model of corporate efficiency. The HR director herself was a trim woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that assessed me carefully as I entered. Mrs. Chen, please have a seat. Ms. Reeves, actually, I corrected gently. I never changed my name professionally. A flicker of approval crossed Diane's face. Of course. My apologies, Ms. Reeves. I understand you're here to discuss the transition of benefits following your separation? Yes. I placed my leather portfolio on her desk. I received notification that I'm being removed from Morgan's health insurance. I wanted to ensure everything is handled correctly. Quite prudent, Diane nodded, typing something into her computer. We've received Mr. Chen's request, but these transitions typically take 30 days to process. You should remain covered until the end of the month. I appreciate that. I paused, then added carefully, there's also the matter of the Greensphere Foundation pledge. Diane frowned. I'm not sure I follow. The environmental education pledge Morgan and I made last quarter. I held out a document from my portfolio. We committed to a 5-year donation schedule to the Foundation's STEM initiative. Given the circumstances, I wanted to clarify how that will be handled. Diane took the document, genuine confusion crossing her face. I don't recall Mr. Chen mentioning any personal pledge to the foundation. Oh, I feigned surprise. That's odd. We discussed it extensively. The paperwork was finalized in February. I pulled out another document, the check with both our signatures and the accompanying pledge form. Perhaps it hasn't been processed yet? Diane studied the documents, her frown deepening. This appears to be in order, but it's strange that it's not in our system. The foundation is Chairman Rydell's personal project. I understand. Perhaps there was some miscommunication. I smiled apologetically. I'd hate for there to be any confusion, especially with the foundation's annual gala next week. Morgan mentioned Chairman Rydell specifically thanked him for our commitment. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. Did he now? I'm sure it's just an administrative oversight, I added smoothly. Would you mind looking into it? I'd like to ensure our pledge is properly recognized, regardless of our personal situation. Of course, Diane said, her tone shifting from sympathetic to intrigued. I'll speak with the foundation director immediately. Thank you. I appreciate your discretion in this matter. As I left Diane's office, I checked my watch. The carefully placed seeds of doubt would need time to germinate. According to the building directory, I had 15 minutes before my next appointment, just enough time for a casual detour. The executive floor was eerily quiet as I stepped off the elevator. Most of the senior staff would be in the daily strategy meeting, including Morgan. The administrative assistant's desk outside. His office was momentarily unattended, giving me the perfect opportunity. I walked purposefully toward Morgan's office, projecting the confidence of someone who belonged there. The door was unlocked. Morgan had always been careless about security, relying on the assistants to monitor access. His office was exactly as I'd imagined from his descriptions over the years. Corner views of the city, modernist furniture, shelves lined with environmental tech awards and industry accolades. What hadn't appeared in his descriptions were the framed photos of Vanessa, now prominently displayed on his desk, already replacing 12 years of our shared history. I took a deep breath, focusing on why I was here. It took less than 2 minutes to place the small USB drive in the underside drawer of his desk, hidden but accessible. On it was a program that would activate during his government presentation, ensuring that even if he noticed and tried to correct the accurate projections I'd embedded, the true data would continue to override his attempts. Just as I was preparing to leave, voices approached in the hallway. I recognized one immediately, Vanessa Rydell, her crisp voice unmistakable. The committee is getting impatient, Morgan. We need to accelerate the timeline. Everything's on track for Friday's presentation, Morgan's voice replied, tense in a way I recognized from countless late nights preparing for big meetings. The projections look solid. They'd better be. My father is staking his reputation on this aerospace contract. Our reputation. Our reputation, Morgan corrected, an edge entering his voice. I'm putting just as much on the line here. Their voices were getting closer. I glanced around frantically, then slipped behind the heavy curtains just as the office door opened. Don't be naive, Vanessa said, her voice now clear in the room. My father brought you into this inner circle because I vouched for you. 1 misstep, and you'll be back pitching mid-level tech grants faster than you can say prenuptial agreement. Through the sliver between the curtains, I could see them. Morgan in his tailored suit looking uncharacteristically uncertain, and Vanessa, immaculate in designer workwear, her posture radiating the confidence of someone born to privilege. That won't happen, Morgan insisted. The presentation is bulletproof. Julia helped me fine-tune it before. Well, you know. Vanessa laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Ah, yes, the helpful little wife. Tell me, did she ever suspect what was really happening with the aerospace contract? My breath caught in my throat. "Of course not," Morgan replied, and the dismissive certainty in his voice cut deeper than his betrayal. "Julia sees trees, not forests. She's good with environmental data, but she never understood the bigger picture." "Well, let's hope you've scrubbed any trace of her work from the final presentation. The last thing we need is some conservationists' cautious projections undermining our narrative." "It's handled," Morgan assured her. "Everything now reflects the growth potential we discussed." Vanessa stepped closer to him, running a manicured finger down his tie. "Good, because once this contract goes through, we'll have more to celebrate than just a professional victory. My father's already talking about fast-tracking you to the executive committee." Morgan smiled, that boyish expression I once found charming now looking calculating and cold. "I told you I was worth the investment." "Prove it on Friday," Vanessa replied, pulling him into a kiss that made my stomach turn. "Then we'll discuss your performance bonus." They left moments later, still discussing contract details as their voices faded down the hallway. I remained frozen behind the curtain, processing what I'd just witnessed. Morgan hadn't just left me for Vanessa. He'd actively colluded with her to manipulate environmental data, knowing exactly what he was doing. When I was certain they were gone, I slipped out from my hiding place, a new resolve hardening within me. This wasn't just about a husband's betrayal anymore. It was about stopping a deliberate environmental fraud that would hurt not only the government funding agencies, but potentially the planet itself. I checked my watch again. 10 minutes until my next appointment. This one on the 3rd floor with Nathan Reed, GreenSphere's compliance officer. I'd scheduled it under the guise of discussing the documentation needed for our divorce proceedings. But now I had something much more valuable to discuss. A first-hand account of Vanessa Rydell explicitly acknowledging the manipulation of aerospace. Contract projections. Nathan Reed, GreenSphere's compliance officer, looked nothing like I'd expected. Rather than the stern, humorless figure Morgan had often described, I found myself facing a thoughtful man in his early 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Reeves," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "How can compliance assist with your divorce documentation?" I took a moment to study him, weighing my options. My original plan had been to hint at irregularities in the aerospace contract, planting just enough doubt to trigger an internal review. But after overhearing Vanessa and Morgan, I knew a subtle approach wouldn't be enough. "Mr. Reed, I need to be direct," I said. "I didn't come about divorce documentation." I reached into my portfolio and placed a printout of the original aerospace environmental projections on his desk. "I came about this." Reed glanced at the document, his expression carefully neutral. "These appear to be internal environmental analyses. May I ask how you came to possess them?" Morgan shared them with me weeks ago when I was helping him prepare his presentation. What he didn't realize was that I saw both versions, the accurate projections and the manipulated ones. Reed's expression didn't change, but his posture straightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a serious allegation, Ms. Reeves." "It is," I agreed, "and I wouldn't make it without evidence." I placed a second document on his desk, a side-by-side comparison I'd prepared showing the original projections versus the altered ones. "The aerospace contract projections being presented to the government on Friday are fraudulent, and I have reason to believe Morgan and Vanessa Rydell are fully aware of this." Reed studied the documents for a long moment, then met my eyes directly. "Why are you bringing this to me instead of the EPA?" "Because I just came from overhearing a conversation between Morgan and Vanessa that confirms they're knowingly deceiving the committee." I described what I'd heard, watching Reed's professional composure falter as I quoted Vanessa's words about cautious projections undermining their narrative. "I see." Reed removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Reeves, I'm obligated to ask, is this information being presented out of professional concern or personal grievance?" It was a fair question. Both, I admitted. I won't pretend that Morgan's betrayal isn't a factor. But I've been an environmental scientist for 15 years. I can't knowingly allow fraudulent ecological data to be presented as fact, especially when government funding is at stake. Reed nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty. Rest assured, I'll look into this immediately. The committee presentation is Friday, I reminded him. That gives you less than 3 days. Understood. Reed gathered the documents carefully. This conversation didn't happen, Ms. Reeves, for your own protection. As I left his office, I checked my phone to find a message from Tess. News. Call me ASAP. Minutes later, I was back in my apartment, staring at Tess in disbelief. They're announcing their engagement already? The words felt like gravel in my throat. Tess nodded grimly. It hit the tech blogs this morning. Apparently, they're planning to make it official at the Green Sphere Foundation Gala next week. I sank onto my couch, trying to process this new blow. We'd been separated for 3 days, and he was already announcing an engagement. The timing isn't coincidental, Jake said, looking up from his laptop at my dining table. The engagement gives them a positive news story just before the committee vote on the aerospace contract. Classic misdirection. Get everyone focused on the power couple romance instead of scrutinizing the environmental impact projections too closely. I'd known intellectually that Morgan and Vanessa were serious, but an official engagement mere days after he'd left our 12-year relationship felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. What's our next move? I asked, forcing myself to focus on strategy rather than pain. I met with my EPA contact this morning, Jake replied. They're very interested in the aerospace documentation, especially given the Rydell family's pattern of suspicious corporate practices. But they need more, ideally, communications explicitly acknowledging the fraud, which we don't have. Yet, I corrected, a new determination hardening within me. But we might have an opportunity to get them. Both turned to look at me expectantly. The Green Sphere Foundation Gala, I explained. It's their annual fundraiser. Very exclusive. Very private. All senior executives attend, including the board. And how exactly would you get access? Tess asked skeptically. I doubt Morgan included you on the guest list. I smiled thinly. He didn't have to. We RSVP'd months ago, and with everything happening so quickly, he probably forgot to cancel my invitation. Jake looked intrigued. That could work. If Morgan and Vanessa are planning to announce their engagement there, they'll be distracted. It might give you an opportunity to gather more evidence. It's too risky, Tess argued. What if Morgan sees you? He'd be expecting you to hide in humiliation. He'd never imagine I'd show up at a public event where he's celebrating with his new fiancée, I replied. Besides, these galas are enormous. Over 300 guests at the Rydell estate. Estate? Jake perked up. The gala is at their home? I nodded. Harold Rydell hosts it every year. Very exclusive, very private, which means limited security cameras and potential access to areas normally off-limits. If Vanessa and her father discuss the aerospace contract there, we might capture the evidence the EPA needs, Jake finished. Tess looked between us, clearly concerned. This sounds like something from a spy movie. You're talking about wearing a wire, breaking into offices. This isn't you, Julia. The old me wouldn't have considered it, I admitted. But the old me also believed in playing by the rules and supporting her husband's career. Look where that got me. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. Nathan Reed, using a personal Gmail account rather than his Green Sphere address. Need to speak urgently. Meet at Lakewood Coffee Shop, 7 p.m. tonight. Come alone. I showed the message to Jake and Tess. It could be a trap, Tess warned immediately. Jake was more measured. Or Reed found something concerning enough that he doesn't want to discuss it on green sphere systems. Only one way to find out, I said, already reaching for my coat. Lakewood Coffee Shop was a small, unremarkable place 10 blocks from the green sphere offices, far enough away that the likelihood of running into other employees was minimal. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Reed arrived precisely at 7, carrying a worn leather briefcase. His usual polished appearance was noticeably rumpled, as if he'd been working for hours without rest. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I couldn't risk speaking at the office. "You found something?" I guessed. Reed glanced around before leaning forward. "I did a preliminary review of the aerospace documentation. The discrepancies are substantial, far beyond optimistic projections or creative interpretations. We're talking about fundamentally misrepresented environmental impact data. I know. What you may not know," Reed continued, lowering his voice further, "is that the pattern extends beyond the aerospace contract. Once I knew what to look for, I found similar manipulations in 3 other recent government bids, all overseen by Vanessa Rydell." My breath caught. "Can you prove it?" "That's the problem." Reed looked genuinely troubled. Shortly after our meeting, I was called into Chairman Rydell's office. He wanted to know why I was accessing secured files related to the aerospace contract. Ice formed in my stomach. "Someone reported you." Reed nodded grimly. I claimed it was a routine pre-committee compliance review. He seemed to accept that, but he paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Ms. Reeves, I've been GreenSphere's compliance officer for 8 years. I've never felt personally threatened in my position until today." What did he say? Nothing explicit, but he reminded me that my daughter's college tuition and my wife's medical treatments are covered by GreenSphere's executive benefits package, benefits that could be restructured in the upcoming fiscal year. The implications were clear. He's threatening your family to keep you quiet. Reed didn't deny it. Instead, he opened his briefcase and slid a USB drive across the table. I made copies of everything I found: trading records, communication logs, contract documentation, all showing the same pattern of environmental data manipulation. "The EPA needs to see this," I said. "Why give it to me? Why not go to the authorities yourself?" "Because I have a chronically ill wife and 2 children who rely on my health insurance," Reed said simply. "And because someone needs to stop this before innocent people lose their tax dollars to a fraudulent green technology scheme. I can't be that person, Ms. Reeves, but maybe you can." As I reached for the drive, Reed caught my wrist. "Be careful. The Rydell family doesn't just influence markets, they influence people in power. Regulators, politicians, funding agencies. If they discover you have this information..." He didn't need to finish the thought. "I understand the risks," I assured him, "and I appreciate what you're doing." Reed stood, straightening his tie. "I never met you. That drive doesn't exist. And on Friday, I'll be sitting in the committee meeting saying nothing as Morgan Chen presents fraudulent environmental projections." His expression hardened with self-loathing. "Sometimes survival means compromise," I said softly. After he left, I sat for several minutes, turning the USB drive over in my hands. The small device contained enough evidence to potentially bring down one of the most powerful families in tech and destroy Morgan's career in the process. But Reed's warning echoed in my mind. If the Rydell family would threaten a loyal employee, like Reed, what would they do to the discarded wife threatening their empire? I tucked the drive into my pocket and headed for the door, already formulating the next phase of our plan. The risks had just increased exponentially, but so had the stakes. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. "Need to discuss property division. Lawyer suggests meeting tomorrow." For a moment, I almost laughed at the mundane normality of the message. Morgan was worried about dividing our kitchenware while I was carrying evidence that could send him to prison. I typed back a single word: fine. The game was changing, and for the first time since Morgan walked out, I was the one holding the cards. The law office of Winters and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of a sleek downtown tower. I'd passed the building countless times but never been inside. Morgan had handled all our legal matters throughout our marriage. Another way he'd kept me dependent, I now realized. The receptionist's smile was professionally sympathetic. "Ms. Reeves, Mr. Chen is already in the conference room with Mr. Winters. This way, please." I followed her down a hallway lined with expensive abstract art, mentally rehearsing the role I needed to play. Wounded but reasonable, emotional but not hysterical. The perfect victim. Morgan stood as I entered, his expression a carefully practiced blend of regret and resolution. Beside him sat an older man with silver hair and a custom suit. Edward Winters himself, not one of his associates. Morgan was pulling out all the stops. "Julia?" Morgan nodded, his voice gentle in a way that once would have melted my defenses. "Thank you for coming." I took the seat opposite them, placing my portfolio on the polished conference table. "Let's keep this brief. I have another appointment at noon." A flicker of surprise crossed Morgan's face. In our marriage, I'd always rearranged my schedule to accommodate his priorities. This small assertion of independence seemed to unsettle him. "Of course," Winters smiled smoothly, "we've prepared a preliminary division of assets that we believe is quite generous." He slid a document across the table. "Mr. Chen is prepared to let you keep the apartment and your vehicle, plus a cash settlement of $200,000. I glanced at the paperwork without touching it. "And in exchange?" "A clean break," Morgan interjected. "No alimony, no future claims. Against my assets or earnings and—" He hesitated, glancing at his lawyer. "And full confidentiality regarding all aspects of your marriage and separation," Winters finished. "A standard non-disclosure agreement." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to sign an NDA about our marriage?" "It's routine in these situations," Winters assured me. "Particularly given Mr. Chen's position at Greensphere and his upcoming advancement." I allowed myself a small smile. "Ah, yes. The executive committee appointment contingent on the aerospace contract, I assume?" Morgan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My career trajectories aren't relevant to our divorce settlement." "On the contrary," I countered, opening my portfolio and removing a document of my own. "They're highly relevant to what I'm prepared to accept." Morgan exchanged a quick glance with Winters. "We're not here to negotiate, Julia. This is a very generous offer. More than fair given the circumstances." "The circumstances being that you left me for your boss's daughter after 12 years of marriage." I kept my voice level. "Or the circumstances where I helped build your environmental tech career while putting my own on hold." "Julia, no, Morgan," I cut him off firmly. "Here are my terms." I slid my counter-proposal across the table. "The apartment, yes. My car, yes. But the cash settlement will be $5 million, representing my investment in your career over 12 years. Winters' eyebrows shot up. "That's completely unreasonable." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "Let me calculate my contributions." 3 relocations for Morgan's ventures, causing me to restart my research career each time. Thousands of unpaid hours helping prepare his environmental impact analyses, including the upcoming aerospace contract. Countless networking events where I connected Morgan with key environmental agencies. The value is actually quite conservative. Morgan's face had flushed red. "This is extortion." "This is compensation," I corrected. "And there's one more condition. No NDA." "Absolutely not," Winters interjected. "Mr. Chen's privacy is non-negotiable." I leaned back in my chair. Then we have nothing more to discuss. I'll have my attorney contact you next week. Your attorney? Morgan looked genuinely startled. Since when do you have a lawyer? Since you decided to end our marriage via text message, I replied, gathering my things. Did you really think I'd just accept whatever you offered, Morgan? As I stood to leave, Morgan reached across the table to grab my wrist. Wait, maybe we can discuss this. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. My terms are clear, and they expire in 48 hours. Conveniently right after your aerospace presentation. His eyes narrowed. What does my presentation have to do with our divorce? I smiled enigmatically. Nothing at all, just an observation about timing. As I walked toward the door, Winters called after me. Ms. Reeves, be reasonable. Mr. Chen is trying to be fair here. I paused, turning back to face them. Fair would have been ending our marriage with dignity instead of discarding me the moment someone with better connections came along. Fair would have been acknowledging my contributions to Morgan's success instead of erasing me from his narrative. You want fair, Mr. Winters? Tell your client to reconsider my terms. The look of confusion on Morgan's face almost made me laugh. He genuinely couldn't understand what had happened to his amenable, accommodating wife. Outside the building, I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling lighter than I had in days. The meeting had served its purpose, not to negotiate a settlement, but to establish my unexpected resolve. The seed of doubt had been planted in Morgan's mind, just in time to distract him before tomorrow's presentation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. EPA meeting confirmed for 2 p.m., bringing someone important. I checked my watch, just enough time to meet Tess for our next phase of preparation. Are you absolutely certain about this? Tess asked for the third time, examining the sleek silver recorder. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. We were sitting in Jake's apartment, surrounded by equipment that looked more appropriate for a spy thriller than an environmental scientist's revenge plot. I'm certain, I confirmed. The USB drive Reed gave me is compelling, but the EPA needs something irrefutable. Vanessa or her father explicitly acknowledging the fraud. And you think they'll just happen to discuss their illegal activities? At a charity gala? Tess's skepticism was clear. No, Jake interjected, adjusting something on his laptop. But they might discuss it in Harold Rydell's home office, which Julia will have legitimate reason to visit. How so? Tess demanded. I smiled slightly. Because the powder room nearest the main ballroom has been accidentally placed out of service. The only other facilities on that floor are down the hallway, directly past Rydell's study. Jake nodded approvingly. And with everyone focused on Morgan and Vanessa's engagement announcement, security will be concentrated in the main reception areas. This is insane, Tess muttered. You're not a spy, Julia. You're an environmental scientist. An environmental scientist who knows exactly what to look for, I corrected. Impact statements, carbon projections, emissions data. I can identify incriminating evidence in seconds. Assuming you can even get into his office without being caught, Tess countered. Jake handed me the recording device, small enough to be hidden in a compact. This has exceptional audio quality and can record for up to 6 hours. Just remember, for the recordings to be admissible, you can't break any laws to obtain them. I know. I won't break in or hack anything. If the office is locked, I walk away. Tess still looked troubled. And what about Morgan? What if he sees you? He'll be too busy playing the adoring fiancé to notice his discarded wife, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Besides, I'll be virtually unrecognizable. It wasn't an exaggeration. The Julia who had attended previous Greensphere functions had been deliberately understated. Modest dresses, minimal makeup, hair simply styled. Morgan had always preferred me to remain in the background, never outshining him or drawing attention. Tomorrow, I would be transformed. The black designer gown Tess had helped me select was sophisticated and striking, with a neckline just daring enough to ensure no one would be thinking about the dutiful environmental researcher I'd once been. The EPA contact seemed optimistic about the evidence we've gathered so far, Jake said, changing the subject. With Reed's documentation and what you've provided, they're building a solid case. But direct testimony from someone inside Greensphere would strengthen it considerably. Someone like Nathan Reed, I suggested. Jake nodded. Exactly. If we can get enough evidence to force the EPA's hand, they could offer Reed immunity in exchange for his cooperation, saving his job and his family's health care. While taking down the people who threatened him, Jake added. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Diane Patterson, Greensphere's HR director. Ms. Reeves, I've looked into the foundation pledge matter you mentioned. There's no record of your donation in our systems, despite the documentation you provided. I'd like to discuss this further at your convenience. I showed the message to Jake and Tess. Another complication, Tess sighed. But Jake looked intrigued. Or another ally. If the HR director is already questioning financial discrepancies, she might be receptive to other concerns. I'll respond after the EPA meeting, I decided. The pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow's committee presentation would publicly expose the manipulated projections. The gala would provide an opportunity to gather definitive evidence. And, with the EPA already building a case. What exactly did you mean about the property division terms expiring after Morgan's presentation? Tess asked suddenly. You don't actually expect him to pay you $1, $5 million, do you? I smiled, thinking of the modified presentation waiting on Morgan's laptop. Let's just say after tomorrow, Morgan might be very motivated to keep me happy. The look I shared with Jake conveyed what I couldn't say aloud. By this time tomorrow, Morgan's career at Greensphere would be in shambles. The settlement offer wasn't about money. It was about establishing a motive for what he would perceive as deliberate sabotage. We should head to the EPA meeting, Jake said, checking his watch. My contact says she's bringing someone from the environmental crime section. As we gathered our things, Tess pulled me aside. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Once you do this, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same. I thought about the text message that had ended my marriage. About 12. Years of supporting Morgan's dreams while deferring my own. About the casual cruelty with which he and Vanessa had discussed me. My life already isn't the same, I replied quietly. The only difference is now I'm the one choosing the direction it takes. The EPA offices awaited, and after that, the final preparations for tomorrow, the day Morgan would discover exactly what he'd lost when he decided I was disposable. Agent Daniels still looked unconvinced. This is a federal investigation, Ms. Reeves, not a revenge plot. The word stung, but I maintained my composure. I'm well aware of the legal stakes, Agent Daniels. This isn't about revenge. It's about preventing millions in government funding from supporting fraudulent environmental technology that could ultimately harm the very ecosystems it claims to protect. Rachel intervened smoothly. Perhaps we could find a compromise. Ms. Reeves attends the gala as planned, but with clear parameters about what constitutes admissible evidence. Over the next hour, we outlined a careful strategy. I would wear the recording device, but would not attempt to access any locked rooms or password-protected files. If I overheard relevant conversations, I would document them without attempting to direct or manipulate the speakers. We'll have agents stationed nearby, Agent Daniels concluded. If you obtain anything significant, you contact us immediately, not the press, not Greensphere's board, us. Understood? Understood, I agreed. But what about Reed? He took an enormous risk providing this evidence. If this leads to charges, we can discuss immunity options, Rachel assured me. But first, we need those recordings. As we prepared to leave, Agent Daniels held me back for a moment. Ms. Reeves, I need to ask, are you absolutely certain your husband is knowingly involved in this fraud? Because once this moves forward, there's no protecting him, regardless of your personal relationship. I met her gaze steadily. I heard him discussing the manipulated projections with Vanessa Rydell. He knows exactly what he's doing. She nodded, seeming satisfied. Then, I'll see you tomorrow night. Be careful. You look transformed, Jake said appreciatively as I emerged from Tess's bedroom the following evening. The woman in the mirror was indeed barely recognizable as the Julia Reeves, who had spent 12 years in Morgan's shadow. The black gown was sophisticated yet daring, with an asymmetrical neckline that drew attention to my collarbones and a slit that revealed just enough leg to ensure no one would be thinking about environmental impact statements. My hair, usually, pulled back in a practical style, now fell in elegant waves over one shoulder. The makeup was subtle but strategic, emphasizing cheekbones I'd forgotten I had. Will Morgan even recognize you? Tess wondered, adjusting my borrowed diamond earrings, worth more than my monthly salary at the conservation nonprofit. That's the idea, I replied. I need to be visible enough to establish my presence, but not so obvious that Morgan immediately spots me, at least not until after his presentation disaster. Jake checked his watch. Speaking of which, the committee meeting should be wrapping up right about now. Are we ready for phase 2? I nodded, touching the small recording device concealed in my evening clutch. As ready as I'll ever be. Tess squeezed my hand. Remember, if anything feels wrong, you walk away. No evidence is worth putting yourself at risk. I'll be fine, I assured her, though my racing pulse suggested otherwise. The hard part is already done. The presentation is set to reveal the true projections. By now, Morgan's professional reputation is in tatters, and the Rydell family will be looking for someone to blame. Stay focused, Jake reminded me. Get what we need, then get out. The car service Jake had arranged arrived precisely on schedule. As we drove toward the Rydell estate in the exclusive Northridge neighborhood, I mentally rehearsed my approach. The gala would be crowded with GreenSphere executives, board members, and wealthy environmental technology investors, most of whom would have just witnessed Morgan's humiliation at the committee meeting. Timing would be crucial. The recording device is activated, Jake confirmed, checking the app on his phone. Remember, try to get as close as possible to any relevant conversations. The microphone is sensitive, but background noise could be an issue. I nodded, watching through the window as we approached the illuminated gates of the Rydell estate. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, disgorging passengers in formal wear. Security guards checked invitations with polite efficiency. This is it, I murmured, more to myself than to Jake and Tess. No turning back now. Jake touched my arm briefly. We'll be monitoring the audio feed from the car. Any problems? Send the text signal, and we'll call with your emergency. With a final deep breath, I stepped from the car and approached the entrance. The security guard barely glanced at my invitation before waving me through with a professional smile. Just like that, I was inside the lion's den. The Rydell mansion was exactly as ostentatious as I'd imagined. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless art displayed with calculated casualness. The main ballroom buzzed with conversation, much of it centered around clusters of GreenSphere executives whose tense expressions told me everything I needed to know about how the committee meeting had gone. I accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, using it as cover to scan the room. No sign of Morgan or Vanessa yet, but Chairman Rydell was holding court near the grand staircase, his forced smile suggesting damage control was already underway. Keeping to the periphery, I circulated slowly, catching fragments of conversations. Complete disaster. The projections were nowhere near what was promised. Committee is furious. The emissions reduction claims were laughable. I don't understand how Chen could have made such a fundamental error. So Morgan was taking the blame. exactly as planned. I suppressed a smile, continuing my circuit of the room until I spotted Nathan Reed standing alone near a window, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. Catching his eye, I gave him an almost imperceptible nod. His expression remained neutral, but he casually moved toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. I waited 30 seconds, then followed. "They're crucifying Chen," Reed murmured when we were briefly alone in the corridor. "The committee has suspended the contract approval pending a complete environmental audit." "And Vanessa?" I asked quietly. "Damage control. She's claiming the errors were all Morgan's, that she tried to warn him, but he was too arrogant to listen." Reed looked exhausted, the strain of the past few days evident in the shadows under his eyes. Rydell pulled me aside before the gala, told me my discretion during the audit would be remembered when bonus season arrives. Another threat? An attempted bribe this time. Reed glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I should get back before I'm missed, but Julia..." He hesitated. "Be careful. I overheard Vanessa telling her father they need to secure the study. Whatever evidence you're hoping to find there may already be gone. Thank you for the warning." As Reed returned to the ballroom, I checked my watch. According to the program, Morgan and Vanessa's engagement announcement was scheduled for 9:30, just 30 minutes away. If I was going to access the study, it needed to be now, while everyone was distracted by the aerospace contract fallout. Following the directions Jake had memorized from the estate blueprints, legally obtained through public records, he'd assured me, I made my way past the out-of-order powder room and down the hallway toward Harold Rydell's private study. Heart pounding. I tried the door. Locked. Reed's warning had come too late. Just as I was about to turn back, voices approached from around the corner. Vanessa's crisp voice unmistakable even in anger. "This is a complete disaster, Morgan. How could you let this happen?" "I don't understand what went wrong," Morgan's voice replied, tension evident in every syllable. "Those weren't the projections I prepared." "Well, they're the projections the committee saw, and now the entire contract is in jeopardy. Do you have any idea what this means?" With nowhere to hide, I made a split-second decision. I turned toward them and began walking confidently in their direction, praying the dramatic transformation in my appearance would buy me precious seconds of non-recognition as we passed in the hallway. Morgan's eyes flickered over me without interest, then widened in stunned realization. "Julia?" I smiled coolly, enjoying his shock. "Hello, Morgan." "Vanessa. Congratulations on your engagement, though perhaps condolences might be more appropriate, given how the committee meeting went." Vanessa recovered first, her perfect features arranging themselves into a brittle smile. "How unexpected to see you here. I wasn't aware Morgan had included you on the guest list." "Oh, he didn't," I replied, pleasantly. "But as it happens, our RSVP was submitted months ago. An oversight in your hasty transition, Morgan?" Morgan's face had drained of color. "Julia, what are you doing here?" "Enjoying the party," I said, raising my champagne flute slightly. "It's quite the event, though the mood seems rather tense. Trouble with the aerospace presentation, I hear." The flash of suspicion in his eyes was immensely satisfying. "You know something about that, don't you?" he accused. "About what?" I asked innocently. "Your doctored projections being replaced with accurate ones. Why would I know anything about that?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You interfered with Greensphere business." "No," I corrected. "I simply ensured the committee received honest environmental data instead of fraudulent ones, as any ethical scientist would do." "You've made a serious mistake," Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "My father would be very interested to know you were the one who manipulated the aerospace numbers," Morgan interrupted. "I manipulated them?" I laughed. "That's rich coming from you. I'm not the one who altered the original environmental impact assessments." not to mention the 3 previous government bids that show the same pattern of fraud. Both of them froze, the confirmation of their guilt written plainly across their faces. And every word was being captured by the recording device in my clutch. "How much do you want?" Morgan asked finally. "Is that what this is about? The divorce settlement?" I laughed softly. "Oh, Morgan, this was never about money." Before either could respond, a commotion from the ballroom interrupted us. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Security personnel rushed past us toward the source of the disturbance. "Your father needs you," Morgan told Vanessa urgently. "We'll deal with her later." As they hurried toward the ballroom, I slipped my phone from my clutch and sent the predetermined text to Jake. The recording had captured everything I needed: explicit knowledge of the fraud, an attempted bribe, and Vanessa's thinly veiled threat. My part was done. Now it was time for the professionals to take over. I moved quickly toward the front entrance. In the chaos, no one noticed as I slipped outside into the cool night air, where Jake and Tess waited in the idling car. "Did you get it?" Jake asked urgently as I slid into the back seat. I nodded, unable to suppress a victorious smile. "Every word." "And the distraction?" "Right on schedule," Tess confirmed. Anonymous tip to the tech press about the committee. Meeting disaster. They're swarming the front gates now. As we pulled away from the Rydell estate, I watched in the side mirror as reporters converged on the arriving guests, cameras flashing. By morning, Morgan and Vanessa's professional humiliation would be splashed across every technology news outlet. But the real blow would come when Agent Daniels arrived with her warrants. "Are you okay?" Tess asked softly, studying my face. "I'm better than okay," I replied, feeling an unfamiliar sense of power. For the first time in 12 years, I'm exactly where I want to be. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, sunlight streaming through Tess's guest room windows where I'd spent the night. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, missed calls from Morgan, urgent texts, voicemails growing increasingly desperate as the hours passed. I ignored them all, instead opening the TechCrunch app to find exactly what we'd anticipated. Greensphere Tech aerospace contract in chaos. Committee suspends vote after presentation disaster. Jake knocked softly before entering with 2 mugs of coffee. "You've made quite a splash," he observed, handing me one. "The tech channels are running nothing else this morning." I scrolled through the article, savoring each devastating paragraph. The piece detailed how Morgan's presentation had spectacularly unraveled when the environmental projections he displayed showed the contract would actually increase carbon emissions rather than reduce them as promised. Committee members were quoted expressing shock and profound concern, with several calling for a complete audit of all recent Greensphere contract bids. "Any word from Agent Daniels?" I asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. She called, "While you were still asleep. They're executing search warrants at Greensphere headquarters this morning." Jake looked impressed. "Your recording from last night was apparently exactly what they needed. Vanessa's acknowledgement of the manipulated projections, plus the attempted bribe, sealed it." My phone buzzed again, Morgan's name flashing, on the screen for the 20th time. With a sigh, I finally answered, putting it on speaker so Jake could hear. "What the hell did you do, Julia?" Morgan's voice was ragged with fury and panic. "Good morning to you too, Morgan. I take it the committee meeting didn't go well?" "You know damn well it didn't. You tampered with my presentation." The accusation echoed through Tess's sunlit kitchen. "I didn't tamper with anything," I corrected. "I simply ensured the committee saw the actual environmental projections instead of the fraudulent ones you and Vanessa created. Those numbers were confidential Greensphere property. Do you have any idea what you've done? The EPA is here. They're seizing computers, files, everything." I couldn't help but smile at his obliviousness. "How unfortunate for you." "This isn't a joke, Julia." Morgan's voice cracked with strain. "They're saying it's criminal fraud. I could go to prison." Perhaps you should have thought of that before you decided to participate in a scheme to defraud government agencies, I suggested mildly. Or before you ended our 12-year marriage with a text message. The line went silent for a moment. When Morgan spoke again, his tone had shifted from anger to calculation. I've been thinking about your settlement proposal, the $5 million. I'm prepared to accept it. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Morgan's transparent attempt at manipulation. How generous of you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Unfortunately, that offer expired yesterday, as I clearly stated. And given this morning's developments, I'm afraid any future settlement discussions will need to involve the EPA's Environmental Crimes section. You don't understand. Morgan's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Vanessa's father is looking for someone to blame. They're going to pin everything on me. That does seem to be the strategy she was pursuing at the gala last night. I agreed. Right before she inadvertently admitted knowledge of the fraud on a recording that's now in federal hands. Another long silence. You were wearing a wire. It wasn't a question. Technically, it was a digital recording device, much more reliable than the old-fashioned kind. Why? The single word contained a universe of betrayal. Rich, coming, from the man who had discarded me without a second thought. Because environmental fraud is a federal crime, Morgan. Because innocent ecosystems would have been damaged when the aerospace contract inevitably failed. Because Nathan Reed was threatened when he tried to do the right thing. I paused. And yes, because you ended our marriage with a text message after 12 years, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient subscription you were canceling. I made a mistake, Morgan said, his voice suddenly soft, the conciliatory tone he'd always used when trying to manipulate me. We can fix this, Julia. Together, like we always have. For a moment, I felt a flicker of our old connection, the partnership I'd believed in for 12 years. But then I remembered the casual cruelty in his voice when he discussed me with Vanessa. Julia sees trees, not forests. She never understood the bigger picture. No, Morgan, we can't fix this. Some things can't be fixed. Please, he whispered, desperation naked in his voice. I'll lose everything. Yes, I agreed softly. You will. I ended the call, setting the phone down carefully on Tess's marble countertop. Jake studied me with newfound respect. Are you okay? He asked after a moment. Better than okay, I replied honestly. For the first time in years, I feel free. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was Agent Daniels. Ms. Reeves, we need you to come to the field office. The case is moving quickly, and there are some developments you should be aware of. The EPA field office hummed with focused energy. Agent Daniels met me in the lobby, her sharp eyes taking in my composed demeanor. Thank you for coming, she said, leading me through a labyrinth of secure corridors. Your recording has proven extremely valuable. Combined with the evidence from Reed's USB drive, we have more than enough to pursue charges against Vanessa and her father. And Morgan? I asked. Her expression was professionally neutral. That's partly why I asked you here. We've received overtures from several Greensphere executives looking to make deals, your husband among them. My step faltered slightly. Morgan wants to cooperate? He's offered to testify against the Rydell family in exchange for reduced charges. Agent Daniels led me into a conference room where Rachel Kim from the EPA waited alongside a distinguished, older man I didn't recognize. Ms. Reeves, this is U.S. Attorney Phillips. He's overseeing the case. Phillips stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and assessing. Ms. Reeves, your assistance has been instrumental in breaking this case. We're building what appears to be one of the most significant environmental fraud prosecutions of the past decade. The Rydell family has been manipulating green technology contracts for years. What happens now? I asked, taking a seat at the conference table. Agent Daniels exchanged glances with Phillips before responding. That depends partly on you. Mr. Chen has offered substantial testimony implicating Vanessa and Harold Rydell, but his credibility is complicated by your personal relationship. You mean because we're in the middle of a divorce? I clarified. Precisely, Phillips nodded. The defense will inevitably claim his cooperation was coerced or influenced by personal animus. Your testimony regarding what you personally witnessed would help corroborate his account. I considered this carefully. Are you asking me to help Morgan get a reduced sentence? We're asking you to help us bring down the people truly responsible for orchestrating this fraud, Agent Daniels corrected gently. Based on what we've uncovered, your husband appears to have been brought into an existing scheme rather than initiating it himself. He's still culpable, I insisted. Absolutely, Phillips agreed, and he will face consequences. But in terms of prosecutorial priorities, the Rydell family represents the greater threat to environmental integrity. I thought about Morgan's desperate phone call that morning, about the text message that had ended our marriage, about 12 years of partnership dissolved in an instant when someone better came along. What would you need from me? I asked finally. A formal statement regarding the conversations you overheard between your husband and Vanessa Rydell, your professional assessment of the environmental documents you reviewed, and potentially, testimony before a grand jury. And in exchange, Agent Daniels' expression softened slightly. We can't offer you anything in exchange, Ms. Reeves. You're a witness, not a defendant. But I can tell you that your cooperation would significantly strengthen the case against the primary architects of this fraud. I considered my options carefully. Refusing to cooperate might hurt the Rydell family's prosecution, but would certainly ensure Morgan faced maximum penalties. Yet the goal had never been Morgan's destruction. It had been justice for the fraud, and yes, a reckoning for his betrayal. I'll cooperate, I decided, but I want something in return. Phillips frowned as Agent Daniels explained. Not from you, I clarified. From Greensphere. Nathan Reed and his family were threatened when he tried to do the right thing. I want assurances that his position is protected. Agent Daniels looked surprised, then thoughtful. That might actually be feasible. The board will be eager to demonstrate their commitment to ethical compliance in the wake of this scandal. Protecting a whistleblower would send the right message. Then we have a deal, I said, extending my hand to Phillips. I'll tell you everything I know about the aerospace fraud. As we shook hands, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. Morgan's attorney requesting an urgent meeting to discuss settlement terms in light of recent developments. The desperation was palpable even in the formal legal language. I silenced the phone, turning my attention to Agent Daniels' questions. Morgan's problems were no longer my concern. He had made his choice when he decided I wasn't good enough for his new life. Now he would live with the consequences. As I detailed everything I discovered about the aerospace fraud, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not just the burden of knowledge, but the heavier burden of trying to be someone I wasn't. The woman sitting in an EPA conference room, precisely dissecting environmental fraud schemes, was the real Julia Reeves, sharp, capable, and finally completely undiminished. One last thing, Agent Daniels said as we concluded. There will likely be significant media interest in this case. As Mr. Chen's wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, I corrected. Of course, in either case, you may face unwanted attention. We can arrange security if necessary. I considered this, then shook my head. That won't be needed. I can handle whatever comes. And for the first time in 12 years, I truly believed it. The next week unfolded like an environmental thriller. I couldn't have scripted better myself. The Greensphere scandal dominated tech and environmental news, with new revelations emerging daily as the investigation expanded. Stocks plummeted, executives resigned, and the aerospace contract was officially terminated. I watched it all from the unexpected sanctuary of Tess's guest room, declining all interview requests and keeping a deliberately low profile. The media, had initially labeled me the vengeful wife, until Jake strategically leaked select details emphasizing the fraud aspect over the personal betrayal. The narrative quickly shifted to whistleblower scientist, a characterization I found far more palatable. "You're trending again," Tess announced, entering with her morning coffee and her tablet displaying various news sites. "The Washington Post is calling you the environmental scientist who brought down a tech empire." I grimaced. Hardly accurate. The Rydell family brought themselves down through their own greed. "Don't diminish what you did," Jake countered, joining us at the breakfast table. "Without your intervention, they would have successfully executed the aerospace fraud, just as they had with previous contracts." My phone buzzed with a text from Diane Patterson, GreenSphere's HR director. "Board emergency meeting concluded. Reed confirmed as permanent ethics and compliance director with expanded authority. Your condition has been met." I showed the YAS message to Jake and Tess. "One good outcome at least." Jake nodded approvingly. "Reed and his family are protected." "What about the rest of the employees?" I asked. The human cost of the scandal had been weighing on me. Hundreds of GreenSphere staff who had nothing to do with the fraud, now facing uncertainty as the company's future hung in the balance. "The board is bringing in crisis management," Tessie reported, scanning a news article. "They're distancing themselves from the Rydell family, claiming they were deceived along with everyone else. Standard damage control." "And Morgan?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Jake and Tess exchanged glances. "You haven't seen today's updates?" Jake asked carefully. "I've been avoiding the coverage," I admitted. The constant speculation about my marriage had become exhausting. Jake handed me his phone, open to a breaking news alert. GreenSphere executive Morgan Chen released on $1 million bail following fraud charges. The accompanying photo showed Morgan leaving the federal courthouse, looking haggard and defeated in a rumpled suit that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. Vanessa was conspicuously absent. His attorney gave a statement saying he was manipulated by the Rydell family and is fully cooperating with authorities, Tess added gently. I stared at the photo, feeling a complex mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. The man in the image was barely recognizable as the confident, ambitious partner I'd spent 12 years with. "Are you okay?" Tess asked, watching me carefully. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. Then, more honestly, "I don't know how I feel. I wanted accountability, but seeing it happen is different." "That's normal, Julia," Jake finished. "You spent a third of your life with him." My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Agent Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "Ms. Reeves, good morning. I wanted to update you personally. Harold and Vanessa Rydell were taken into custody an hour ago. The charges include securities fraud, environmental fraud, and obstruction of justice." "I saw that Morgan has been released on bail," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes, his cooperation has been extensive. The U.S. attorney is considering a reduced charge in exchange for his testimony against the Rydell family." I absorbed this information silently. Morgan would likely avoid the worst consequences of his actions, again, by sacrificing others. "There's something else," Agent Daniels continued. "In the course of our investigation, we've uncovered evidence that may be relevant to your divorce proceedings. Financial accounts that Mr. Chen apparently concealed from both you and the authorities." My breath caught. "What kind of accounts?" "Offshore holdings, primarily. Established approximately 3 years ago, around the time of the Solar Tech acquisition. The amounts are substantial. 3 years ago, while we were still happily married, or so I'd believed, while I was managing our household on a careful budget, Morgan had been secretly stashing funds beyond my reach." "How substantial?" I asked, my environmental researcher's precision asserting itself through the shock. "Initial estimates suggest approximately $37 million. The figure hung in the air like an accusation. All those years of careful budgeting, of delayed vacations and modest celebrations, of putting his career first because we're investing in our future, while he built a secret financial escape hatch. I see, I said finally. Thank you for telling me. The funds have been frozen pending the investigation, but you should consult your divorce attorney. As his spouse at the time these accounts were established, you may have legal claims to these assets. She paused. I should also mention that Mr. Chen has been trying to contact you through our office. He's quite persistent. I'm sure he is, I replied dryly, now that he needs my help again. After ending the call, I relayed the information to Jake and Tess, whose expressions cycled through shock to outrage on my behalf. 3.7 million? Tess repeated incredulously. While you were buying clothes off the clearance rack and driving a 10-year-old car? Apparently, I confirmed, surprised by my own calm. Perhaps I had already reached my quota of shock where Morgan was concerned. You need to call Gregory Winston, Jake insisted, referring to the divorce attorney he had connected me with. This changes everything about your settlement negotiations. It does, I agreed, already dialing the number. Gregory Winston's office projected exactly the confidence his formidable reputation suggested: leather-bound law books, tasteful art, and furnishings that whispered rather than shouted their expense. These offshore accounts transform your position entirely, he explained, reviewing the preliminary documentation Agent Daniels had provided. Not only were these marital assets that Mr. Chen concealed, but their establishment coincides with potentially fraudulent activities at Greensphere, meaning the court will take an extremely dim view of his financial deception, particularly given the criminal context. I absorbed this, thinking of all the times Morgan had insisted we couldn't afford certain expenses: my advanced environmental science courses, repairs to my aging car, conservation research trips, all while millions sat in accounts I knew nothing about. What's our approach? I asked finally. Winston smiled thinly. Aggressive but measured. We request immediate freezing of all marital assets pending full financial disclosure, with specific reference to the newly discovered accounts. We position you as the wronged spouse, both personally and financially, emphasizing your cooperation with federal authorities despite his betrayal. And realistically, what can I expect? Given the circumstances, his legal jeopardy, the hidden assets, the 12-year marriage where you sacrificed your own career advancement, I would anticipate a settlement heavily weighted in your favor. Possibly as high as 75–80% of the marital assets, including the offshore funds. The figure was staggering. Even a 50% share of the hidden accounts would transform my financial reality completely. His attorney has been calling daily, I noted, increasingly desperate to schedule settlement discussions. Of course, Winston nodded. Mr. Chen is facing potential criminal penalties and career destruction. Resolving the divorce quickly and quietly would be one less front to fight on. He studied me thoughtfully. May I ask what you want from this settlement, Ms. Reeves, beyond the financial aspects? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? When this all began, it had been about justice, making Morgan face consequences for his betrayal and stopping the fraud that would harm environmental initiatives. But now? I hesitated, searching for the right words. Acknowledgement. Not just of the financial contributions he hid, but of the years I spent supporting his career at the expense of my own. The environmental innovations I helped him develop, the strategies I helped him create. I want the truth recognized. Winston nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll pursue. Financial compensation is straightforward. Recognition and acknowledgement require a different approach. As we discussed strategy, my phone buzzed with yet another call from Morgan. For the first time in days, I decided to answer, putting it on speaker so Winston could hear. Julia. Morgan's voice was a blend of relief and calculation. Thank you for finally taking my call. We need to talk. About the $37 million you hid from me, I asked calmly. Or about something else? The silence that followed confirmed he hadn't expected me to know about the accounts. The feds told you, he said finally. I'm with my attorney now, Morgan, I interrupted. Gregory Winston. Any explanation should go through him. Your attorney? The surprise in his voice was almost comical. Since when do you have... Never mind. Julia, we need to handle this privately, between us, like we always have. Like we always have, I repeated. You mean with you making decisions and me supporting them? That arrangement ended when you ended our marriage. This situation is more complicated than you understand, he insisted, his tone shifting to the patronizing one he'd often used when explaining complex business matters to me. Actually, Mr. Chen, Winston interjected smoothly, I believe my client understands the situation perfectly. She's aware of your legal jeopardy, your cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors, and most importantly, your deliberate concealment of substantial marital assets. Another long silence. Who is this again? Gregory Winston of Winston Hargrove and Associates. I'll be representing Ms. Reeves in your divorce proceedings. All future communications should come through my office. My assistant will send our availability for preliminary settlement discussions. Settlement discussions? Morgan's voice rose slightly. Julia, be reasonable. This is hardly the time to be making financial demands, given everything that's happening. On the contrary, I replied, it seems like exactly the right time to ensure full disclosure of all marital assets before any further legal complications arise. What does that mean? The edge of panic in his voice was unmistakable. Winston answered for me. It means, Mr. Chen, that the federal prosecutors currently considering your cooperation agreement would likely be interested in any additional financial improprieties you've failed to disclose. My client has been an exemplary witness for their case. I imagine they'd take her concerns quite seriously. The threat was elegant in its simplicity. Morgan's cooperation deal hinged on complete honesty with prosecutors. If they believed he was still concealing assets or information. I'll have my attorney contact you, Morgan said finally, defeat evident in his voice. As the call ended, Winston gave me an approving nod. Well handled. He's on the defensive now, which is exactly where we want him. For the first time since Morgan's betrayal, I felt a genuine sense of resolution approaching, not just revenge, but restoration of my financial security, my professional identity, and most importantly, my sense of self-worth. What now? I asked Winston. Now, he replied, gathering his notes. We prepare to negotiate from a position of absolute strength, and we make Morgan Chen regret every moment he underestimated you. The conference room at Winston's office hummed with tense energy. On one side of the polished mahogany table, Gregory Winston sat beside me, documents meticulously arranged before him. Across from us, Morgan and his attorney Richard Harwood looked distinctly uncomfortable. 2 weeks had passed since our phone confrontation. In that time, the Green Sphere scandal had deepened, with 5 additional executives indicted and the company's stock losing nearly 45% of its value. Harold Rydell had been denied bail, while Vanessa had been released on house arrest with a $5 million bond, a stark contrast to her plans for a lavish engagement party at the Rydell estate. Shall we begin? Winston suggested, his tone pleasant but unyielding. We've reviewed your initial settlement proposal, Mr. Harwood, and frankly, it's inadequate. Harwood, visibly less confident than during our first meeting, cleared his throat. My client is facing extraordinary circumstances. His financial future is uncertain given the ongoing legal proceedings. His financial future became uncertain the moment he chose to participate in environmental fraud, Winston countered smoothly. And more relevant to our discussion, the moment he concealed $37 million in marital assets from his wife of 12 years. Morgan wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at his folded hands on the table. His designer suit hung slightly loose, as if he'd lost weight, and shadows darkened the skin beneath his eyes. Part of me, a small, distant part, almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "We're prepared to increase the settlement offer to $600,000. Harwood proposed, along with the apartment and vehicle as previously discussed. Winston didn't bother hiding his amusement. That's still not remotely close to an equitable division of marital assets, particularly given the recently discovered offshore accounts. Those accounts are currently frozen by federal authorities," Harwood reminded us. "They may be subject to fines and forfeitures depending on the outcome of the criminal case. A case in which Mr. Chen is cooperating to reduce his own exposure," Winston noted. "And regardless of their current status, the accounts represent marital assets deliberately concealed from Ms. Reeves during their marriage. The court will take an extremely dim view of such deception." Morgan finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "What exactly are you asking for, Julia?" Winston gave me a subtle nod, our prearranged signal that I could take the lead if I wished. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsing my points carefully. "Full disclosure of all financial assets first and foremost," I began, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my stomach. "Followed by an equitable division that acknowledges my contributions to your career and the opportunities I sacrificed for your advancement." Morgan's expression tightened. "Your contributions to my career?" "The relocations I accepted for your ventures, setting back my own research career each time. The environmental expertise I provided that made GreenSphere's early products viable. The networking I did with conservation agencies and climate scientists. The presentations I helped prepare, including the aerospace contract." I maintained eye contact, refusing to be diminished. 12 years of partnership that you ended with a text message when someone with better connections came along." "That's not fair," Morgan protested, but the objection sounded hollow even to him. "What's not fair," I continued, "is discovering that while I was budgeting carefully for our household expenses, you were secretly transferring millions to offshore accounts I knew nothing about." Harwood intervened, clearly sensing his client's growing discomfort. "We're prepared to acknowledge undisclosed assets and adjust our offer accordingly. However, Mr. Chen's cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors hinges on his ability to pay potential fines and restitution." "How convenient," Winston observed dryly. "However, those potential obligations don't supersede existing marital property rights. Ms. Reeves is entitled to her fair share regardless of Mr. Chen's subsequent legal troubles." The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours, with offers and counteroffers exchanged in increasingly technical terms. Throughout, Morgan grew visibly more agitated while Harwood struggled to maintain a coherent strategy. Finally, Winston tapped his pen against his legal pad. "I believe we've reached an impasse, unless Mr. Chen is prepared to substantially improve his offer. We'll need to proceed to formal discovery and potentially trial." "That would be unwise," Harwood cautioned, "given the public nature of the GreenSphere scandal. A contentious divorce proceeding would only generate additional negative publicity." "For whom?" Winston asked innocently. "Ms. Reeves has been widely praised as a whistleblower who helped expose significant environmental fraud. Mr. Chen, on the other hand." He left the implication hanging. Morgan's reputation was already in tatters. A public divorce revealing his financial deception would only cement his disgrace. "May I speak with Julia privately?" Morgan asked suddenly. Both attorneys looked surprised by the request. Winston turned to me, eyebrows raised in silent question. 5 minutes, I agreed after a moment's consideration. As Morgan and I moved to the smaller conference room next door, I caught Winston's reassuring nod. He would be watching through the glass wall that separated the spaces, close enough to intervene if necessary. Morgan closed the door behind us, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "This isn't you, Julia," he began, his tone almost pleading. "The hardball negotiations, the threats, the lawyers, this isn't who we are." "No," I corrected him. "This is exactly who I am. You just never bothered to notice. And there is no we anymore, Morgan. You made that abundantly clear when you left." He winced. "I made a mistake. A terrible, inexcusable mistake." "Which one?" I asked coolly. "Leaving me? The environmental fraud? Or the hidden millions?" "All of it." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm drowning here, Julia. The feds, the lawyers, the media. I've lost everything." "How terrible for you," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "To lose everything because of your own choices." I know. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I deserve all of it, but please, can't we handle this between ourselves like we used to, without the lawyers turning it into warfare?" The earnest desperation in his eyes might once have swayed me. For 12 years, I'd been the understanding wife, the supportive partner who helped solve Morgan's problems. It would be so easy to fall back into that familiar pattern. But the woman who had stood by Morgan unquestioningly no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, clearer about her own worth. "No, Morgan, we can't, because I no longer trust you to be honest with me. You hid millions while telling me we couldn't afford to replace my 10-year-old car. You discussed me with contempt while I was helping prepare the very presentation that advanced your career. You ended our marriage when someone better came along, only to come crawling back when she abandoned you." His face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I agreed. "But it's reality. Your reality, created by your choices." "So this is revenge?" he asked, an edge entering his voice. "Making me pay because I hurt you?" "This isn't revenge," I corrected him. "This is consequence. This is me valuing myself, enough to demand what I'm legally and morally entitled to, something I should have done years ago." Morgan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. "What do you want?" he asked finally, defeat evident in his slumped shoulders. "Everything I outlined in our counter-proposal, full financial disclosure, equitable division of all assets including the offshore accounts, and a public acknowledgement of my contributions to your career." "Public acknowledgement?" His voice rose in disbelief. "You want me to humiliate myself further?" "I want you to tell the truth," I clarified. "The truth you're presumably telling federal prosecutors, that I helped develop environmental technologies, including for the aerospace contract, that my scientific expertise was integral to your success, that our marriage was a partnership that you betrayed professionally and personally." He was silent for a long moment, weighing his options, which I knew were severely limited. "And if I agree to this, then we settle quickly, quietly, and you can focus on your cooperation agreement without the distraction of a contentious divorce." Morgan's calculating mind was visibly working, assessing risks and benefits. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll agree to your terms, but I want one thing in return." "You're hardly in a position to make demands," I noted. "Not a demand, a request." His voice softened. "I want you to know that I really did love you, Julia, for most of our marriage. The person I became at Greensphere, the one who could discard 12 years with a text message. That's not who I want to be." Perhaps it was the unexpected vulnerability, or simply the final acknowledgement of what we'd lost, but I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the bitter anger I'd been carrying. "I believe you," I said finally, "but it doesn't change anything." "I know." The resignation in his voice was complete. "I'll tell Harwood to accept your terms." As we returned to the main conference room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass wall. Straight-backed, clear-eyed, undiminished. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had sat sobbing on the edge of our bed just weeks ago, destroyed by a text message. "We're prepared to accept Ms. Reeves's terms," Morgan announced to the surprised attorneys. All of them. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of technical details and schedules for executing the agreement. Throughout, I maintained a professional composure, even as I watched Morgan sign away much of his remaining financial security. It wasn't until I was alone in the elevator descending from Winston's office that I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what had just happened. Morgan Chen, the man who had deemed me not good enough for his new life, had just surrendered to my terms completely. The victory brought neither joy nor satisfaction, only a quiet sense of justice finally served. As the elevator doors opened, to the lobby, I stepped forward into whatever came next, finally free of the weight of being underestimated. 3 months after the settlement meeting, I stood in the empty apartment that had once been our home, now solely mine. The movers had just left with the last of Morgan's remaining possessions: books, artwork, and mementos he'd been allowed to collect under the supervision of his attorney. Our lives, once so entwined, were now officially and completely separate. My phone buzzed with a text from Tess. "Saw the news. You okay?" The news was everywhere, impossible to miss, even if I'd tried. Morgan's plea deal had been finalized and announced that morning. In exchange for his testimony against the Rydell family and other Greensphere executives, he would serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The financial penalties were substantial: $2, $5 million in fines, plus restitution to affected government agencies. What little remained of his assets after our divorce settlement would be effectively wiped out. I texted back, "I'm fine. Just finished clearing out the apartment." Tess's response was immediate. "Coming over with wine and takeout. No arguments." I smiled, grateful for her persistence. The emotions of the day were more complex than I'd anticipated. Not regret exactly, but a strange melancholy at the final dissolution of 12 years of shared history. While waiting for Tess, I wandered through rooms that felt both familiar and foreign. The space was mine now, but I'd already decided to sell it. Too many memories. Too much of Morgan's presence lingered in the sustainable bamboo flooring he'd insisted on, the kitchen he'd redesigned to his specifications, the office where we'd once worked side by side developing environmental technologies. My phone rang, Jake this time. "I just read the plea announcement," he said without preamble. 18 months seems light given the scope of the fraud. "The prosecutors got what they wanted," I replied, settling onto the window seat that overlooked the park. Morgan's testimony apparently provided the final evidence they needed against Harold Rydell. The case against him is ironclad now. And Vanessa? Also pleading guilty from what I understand. Her deal involves no prison time, but a lifetime ban from the environmental technology industry and forfeiture of most of her assets. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had taken Morgan from me had ultimately lost everything herself. "Poetic justice," Jake observed, "though the real victory is yours. Have you seen the industry press coverage of your settlement terms?" I had. The public acknowledgement of my contributions to Morgan's career, a condition I'd insisted on, had generated unexpected attention in scientific circles. Former Greensphere executive acknowledges wife's uncredited role in environmental innovations, read one headline. The Invisible Partner, How Julia Reeves Shaped Greensphere Technologies Without Recognition, declared another. It's surreal, I admitted. I never wanted publicity. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But there's value in having the truth recognized, especially for other women in similar situations. After we hung up, I checked my email to find 5 new messages from environmental organizations and tech firms inquiring about my availability for consulting positions. My professional reputation, once overshadowed by Morgan's career, was now standing on its own, bolstered by what the business press had dubbed environmental integrity that uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Tess stood in the hallway, loaded down with bags from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of champagne. "I know I said wine," she explained, bustling past me into the kitchen, but this felt more like a champagne occasion. The final chapter of Morgan Chen is officially closed. I followed her, watching as she efficiently unpacked containers. Is it wrong that I don't feel more? I don't know. Victorious? I asked. Tess paused, studying me carefully. No. It would be weird if you were celebrating someone you loved going to prison, even after what he did. She resumed setting out the food. Besides, this was never about destroying Morgan. It was about justice, for you, for the government agencies that would have been defrauded, for Reed and his family. You're right, I agreed, helping her locate plates in the half-packed kitchen. I just feel empty. Like now that it's over, I'm not sure what comes next. That's called freedom, Tess said gently. The freedom to decide what you want without consideration for Morgan's career or preferences. It's unfamiliar territory. The champagne cork popped with a satisfying sound as Tess filled 2 glasses. To new beginnings, she proposed, raising hers in a toast. To new beginnings, I echoed, though uncertainty lingered beneath the words. As we ate, Tess updated me on the continuing fallout at Greensphere. The company was undergoing a complete restructuring, with most of the senior leadership replaced. Nathan Reed had been instrumental in implementing new compliance systems, his position more secure than ever. He sent me a thank you note, I mentioned, remembering the handwritten card that had arrived yesterday. Said his daughter's medical treatments have been approved for another year under the company's insurance. One life genuinely improved, Tess nodded approvingly. What about the others, though? I asked. The regular employees who had nothing to do with the fraud but lost jobs or savings when Greensphere stock collapsed? Tess's expression softened. You can't take responsibility for that, Julia. The Rydell family and executives like Morgan caused those consequences, not you. I know. Intellectually, I know that. But still. I trailed off, struggling to articulate the nagging discomfort that had been growing since the plea announcement. You have too much empathy for your own good, Tess declared, refilling our glasses. Even for people who hurt you. Perhaps she was right. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to feel satisfaction at the complete destruction of Morgan's life and career. The man I'd married, the ambitious but idealistic environmental engineer who'd once dreamed of creating sustainable technologies that actually helped the planet, had been buried somewhere beneath years of Greensphere's toxic culture and his own worst instincts. Enough about Morgan, Tess decided, changing the subject. Let's talk about you. 5 consulting offers in 1 week is impressive. I smiled weakly. They're more interested in the whistleblower who brought down Greensphere than in my actual environmental expertise. So prove them wrong, Tess challenged. Show them exactly how valuable those skills are. My phone buzzed again. A text from Agent Daniels. Rydell trial date set for February. Prosecution may need additional testimony from you. Available to discuss next week? The message was a reminder that while Morgan's chapter might be ending, the larger story of the Greensphere fraud continued. My role in it wasn't quite finished. What's that? Tess asked, noting my thoughtful expression. Just the EPA. The Rydell trial is moving forward. Are you ready for that? More testimony? More public attention? I considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, the prospect would have terrified me. Now, after weathering the media, scrutiny of the scandal and divorce, after standing firm against Morgan's manipulation attempts, After rebuilding my professional identity from the ground up, it seemed merely another challenge to navigate. I think I am, I realized, somewhat surprised by my own confidence. Tess raised her glass again. To Julia Reeves, too. 0, stronger, wiser, and infinitely less willing to put up with anyone's bullshit. I laughed, genuinely for what felt like the first time in days. I'll drink to that. Later, after Tess had left and I was alone in the quiet apartment, my phone lit up with a notification I'd been half expecting, half dreading all day. An email from Morgan, sent from the account he was permitted to use for personal matters while awaiting his surrender date. For long moments, I stared at the unopened message, finger hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to erase it unread, a final act of separation from the man who had so casually discarded me. But curiosity, and something deeper, perhaps a need for real closure, won out. The message was brief. Julia, by the time you read this, the plea deal will be public. I report to Lakeview in 3 weeks. Before I go, I wanted to say what I couldn't seem to articulate properly during our last meetings. You were right about everything. The fraud, the hidden accounts, the way I diminished your contributions over the years. The man I became at Greensphere was someone I never intended to be, but that's not an excuse. It's simply a fact I'm trying to face honestly now that everything has collapsed. Vanessa hasn't contacted me since her own plea negotiations began. The irony isn't lost on me that I left someone loyal and genuine for someone who abandoned me at the first sign of trouble. Another consequence I've earned. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I wanted you to know that. The public acknowledgement of your role in my career wasn't just a settlement condition I fulfilled. It was the truth I should have recognized years ago. The life you build from here will be extraordinary because you are. I see that clearly now. Too late. Morgan. I read the message twice, searching for the manipulative angle, the hidden agenda. But for perhaps the first time in years, Morgan's words seemed genuinely transparent. Not a calculation or strategy, just a final truth-telling before the consequences of his actions fully descended. I closed the email without responding. Perhaps someday I would. Tonight, it was enough to recognize that while Morgan had indeed lost everything, I had found something far more valuable: myself. Setting the phone aside, I moved to the window that overlooked the city. Lights sparkled across the skyline, representing countless lives and stories unfolding in parallel to my own. Somewhere in that vastness was the next chapter of Julia Reeves's life, not defined by being Morgan's wife or Greensphere's whistleblower, but by choices entirely my own. For the first time since receiving that devastating text message months ago, I felt not just resignation or grim satisfaction, but genuine anticipation for what came next. The future stretched before me, unmarked and full of possibility. It was time to start writing it on my own terms. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the National Conference for Environmental Ethics, looking out over a sea of attentive faces. The journey from discarded wife to keynote speaker had been unexpected, to say the least. The patterns were there all along, I explained, advancing to the next slide in my presentation. Not just in the manipulated projections, but in the corporate culture that enabled them. In environments where ethical concerns are treated as obstacles rather than safeguards, fraud doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in increments. The audience, environmental professionals, compliance officers, and industry regulators, nodded in recognition. Many had witnessed similar patterns in their own institutions, though perhaps not with the dramatic consequences of Greensphere. The Greensphere case study isn't just about environmental fraud, I continued. It's about the ecosystem that nurtures misconduct and silences those who question it. It's about what happens when we value appearance over substance, status over integrity. As I finished my presentation, the applause was warm and sustained. During the Q&A session that followed, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. "Ms. Reeves, your exposure of the aerospace fraud is well documented. But given the personal connection, your marriage to one of the key participants, was there ever a moment when you hesitated to come forward?" The question was asked respectfully, but the underlying curiosity was clear. How had I found the strength to bring down my own husband? Of course I hesitated, I answered honestly. Not because I questioned whether the fraud should be exposed, but because I understood the personal cost of being the one to expose it. Whistleblowers often face isolation, retaliation, and public scrutiny. I wasn't immune to those fears. I paused, considering how much of my personal story to share. Over the past year, I'd learned to balance transparency with appropriate boundaries. What ultimately compelled me to act wasn't anger at my ex-husband's betrayal, though many media narratives framed it that way. It was the realization that government agencies and environmental initiatives would suffer tangible harm from this deception. Once I understood the scope of the fraud, remaining silent wasn't an option. The session concluded with thoughtful discussion about creating corporate environments where ethical concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. As attendees gathered their materials, Nathan Reed approached the podium, his expression warm. "Excellent presentation, Julia," he said. "You managed to make compliance sound almost exciting." I laughed, the highest compliment a compliance officer could give. In the year since the Greensphere scandal, Reed and I had developed a genuine friendship. As Greensphere's new ethics and compliance director, he had implemented significant reforms, many based on recommendations from my consulting work. "How's the family?" I asked as we walked toward the networking reception. "Thriving," he replied with evident relief. "Amy's latest treatments are showing real progress. And with the new health insurance protocols we've implemented, other employees with chronic conditions are finally getting proper coverage." It was outcomes like these, tangible improvements in people's lives, that had helped me reconcile with the aftermath of the Greensphere exposure. While the scandal had indeed cost jobs and shareholder value in the short term, the restructured company that emerged was fundamentally healthier and more ethical. "And you?" Reed asked. "Jake mentioned your consulting firm is expanding." "Just hired 3 new analysts," I confirmed. "Turns out there's significant demand for experts in detecting environmental manipulation. Who knew?" After the reception, I returned to my hotel room to find several messages waiting. The first was from Tess, a selfie of her holding up a magazine with my firm featured in an article about environmental watchdogs reshaping corporate sustainability. The second was from Jake, confirming dinner plans for when I returned to the city. The third was unexpected, an email notification from the federal prison email system. Morgan, reaching out for the first time in 6 months. I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the screen. Our last communication had been brief and pragmatic, his acknowledgement of some final divorce paperwork that required his signature. Since then, silence. Finally, curiosity won out. "Julia, I saw the announcement about your keynote at the ethics conference. It seems inadequate to say I'm proud of you given everything, but it's true nonetheless. My time here has been clarifying, in ways I never expected. The man I became at Greensphere, ambitious at any cost, willing to compromise principles for status, was someone I once swore I'd never become. Somehow, the transformation happened so gradually I didn't recognize it, until everything collapsed. I'm working with the inmate education program now, teaching basic environmental science. These men have made mistakes, as I did, but many are trying to rebuild lives on better foundations. There's a certain symmetry to it that feels right. The Rydell trial coverage has been everywhere. Vanessa's testimony was particularly revealing about her father's long history of environmental manipulation. I was just another useful pawn in their operations, though that doesn't excuse my willing participation once I understood what was happening. I don't expect a response to this message. I just wanted you to know that the work you're doing matters, not just in exposing fraud, but in helping create systems where ethical voices aren't silenced. The settlement acknowledgement of your contributions to my career was the minimum you deserved, not the maximum. I see that clearly now. Be well, Morgan. I set the phone down, processing emotions too complex to immediately name. There was no manipulation. In his words, no attempt to elicit sympathy or rekindle connection, just a recognition of reality and perhaps a genuine attempt at amends. My phone rang, pulling me from reflection. It was Diane Patterson, GreenSphere's HR director, who had become another unexpected ally in the aftermath of the scandal. Julia, I hope I'm not interrupting your conference. Not at all. Just finished my presentation. Wonderful. I wanted to update you personally. The board approved the whistleblower protection policies we discussed. The anonymous reporting system goes live next month, with direct oversight from Reed's department. That's excellent news, I replied, genuinely pleased. This had been one of my key recommendations as a consultant, creating mechanisms for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. They're calling it the Reeves Protocol, Diane added. Seemed fitting, given your role in exposing the aerospace fraud. After the call ended, I stood at the hotel window, looking out over the city lights. So much had changed in a single year. The woman who had once sat devastated on the edge of her bed, destroyed by a text message ending her marriage, felt like a different person entirely. The divorce settlement had indeed left me financially secure, with my share of the offshore accounts providing a comfortable cushion even after legal fees. But the real value had been in the public acknowledgement of my contributions to Morgan's career, which had opened doors I hadn't even known existed. My consulting firm, Reeves Environmental Integrity, now employed 7 people and had a waiting list of clients seeking expertise in detecting and preventing corporate environmental manipulation. I'd testified 3 more times in the ongoing prosecutions of GreenSphere executives, each appearance further establishing my professional credibility independent of the whistleblower narrative. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of self, not as Morgan's wife or support system, but as an environmental scientist with valuable skills and insights. The confidence I now carried into boardrooms and conference halls was built on genuine expertise, not defiance or revenge. A text from Jake interrupted my reflection. Dinner at 8? Celebrating your keynote and some news of my own. I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. My relationship with Jake had evolved gradually from professional allies to something deeper. We were taking it slowly, both aware of the complex circumstances that had brought us together, but the connection felt genuine and grounding. Before heading to dinner, I considered whether to respond to Morgan's email. After a moment's thought, I composed a brief reply. Morgan, thank you for your message. I'm glad to hear you're finding meaning in the education program. The ethics conference was indeed a positive experience, particularly connecting with other professionals working to create more transparent environmental practices. I hope you continue to find clarity during this time. Julia. Not warm, not cold, just honest. The same quality I now insisted on in all areas of my life. As I gathered my things for dinner, I caught my reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman, looking back, bore little resemblance to the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal a year ago. This Julia stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her expression confident in a way that came from within, rather than being defined by someone else's perception. He had left me for someone he thought was better, someone with connections and status that would advance his ambitions. In doing so, he'd lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his wealth, his future in environmental technology. But I had gained something far more valuable than material assets or professional status. I had gained myself, undiminished, unbowed, and finally seen for exactly who I was. As I stepped into the evening air, I felt not the grim satisfaction of revenge completed, but the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. That, in the end, was the most satisfying victory of all. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the National Conference for Environmental Ethics, looking out over a sea of attentive faces. The journey from discarded wife to keynote speaker had been unexpected, to say the least. The patterns were there all along, I explained, advancing to the next slide in my presentation. Not just in the manipulated projections, but in the corporate culture that enabled them. In environments where ethical concerns are treated as obstacles rather than safeguards, fraud doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in increments. The audience, environmental professionals, compliance officers, and industry regulators, nodded in recognition. Many had witnessed similar patterns in their own institutions, though perhaps not with the dramatic consequences of Greensphere. The Greensphere case study isn't just about environmental fraud, I continued. It's about the ecosystem that nurtures misconduct and silences those who question it. It's about what happens when we value appearance over substance, status over integrity. As I finished my presentation, the applause was warm and sustained. During the Q&A session that followed, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. Ms. Reeves, your exposure of the aerospace fraud is well documented, but given the personal connection, your marriage to one of the key participants, was there ever a moment when you hesitated to come forward? The question was asked respectfully, but the underlying curiosity was clear. How had I found the strength to bring down my own husband? Of course I hesitated, I answered honestly. Not because I questioned whether the fraud should be exposed, but because I understood the personal cost of being the one to expose it. Whistleblowers often face isolation, retaliation, and public scrutiny. I wasn't immune to those fears. I paused, considering how much of my personal story to share. Over the past year, I'd learned to balance transparency with appropriate boundaries. What ultimately compelled me to act wasn't anger at my ex-husband's betrayal, though many media narratives framed it that way. It was the realization that government agencies and environmental initiatives would suffer tangible harm from this deception. Once I understood the scope of the fraud, remaining silent wasn't an option. The session concluded with thoughtful discussion about creating corporate environments where ethical concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. As attendees gathered their materials, Nathan Reed approached the podium, his expression warm. Excellent presentation, Julia, he said. You managed to make compliance sound almost exciting. I laughed, the highest compliment a compliance officer could give. In the years since the Greensphere scandal, Reed and I had developed a genuine friendship. As Greensphere's new ethics and compliance director, he had implemented significant reforms, many based on recommendations from my consulting work. How's the family? I asked as we walked toward the networking reception. Thriving, he replied with evident relief. Amy's latest treatments are showing real progress, and with the new health insurance protocols we've implemented, other employees with chronic conditions are finally getting proper coverage. It was outcomes like these, tangible improvements in people's lives, that had helped me reconcile with the aftermath of the Greensphere exposure. While the scandal had indeed cost jobs and shareholder value in the short term, the restructured company that emerged was fundamentally healthier and more ethical. And you? Reed asked. Jake mentioned your consulting firm is expanding. Just hired 3 new analysts, I confirmed. Turns out there's significant demand for experts in detecting environmental manipulation. Who knew? After the reception, I returned to my hotel room to find several messages waiting. The first was from Tess, a selfie of her holding up a magazine with my firm featured in an article about environmental watchdogs reshaping corporate sustainability. The second was from Jake, confirming dinner plans for when I returned to the EID city. The third was unexpected, an email notification from the federal prison email system. Morgan, reaching out for the first time in 6 months. I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the screen. Our last communication had been brief and pragmatic, his acknowledgement of some final divorce paperwork that required his signature. Since then, silence. Finally, curiosity won out. "Julia, I saw the announcement about your keynote at the ethics conference. It seems inadequate to say I'm proud of you given everything, but it's true nonetheless. My time here has been clarifying, in ways I never expected. The man I became at Greensphere, ambitious at any cost, willing to compromise principles for status, was someone I once swore I'd never become. Somehow the transformation happened so gradually I didn't recognize it, until everything collapsed. I'm working with the inmate education program now, teaching basic environmental science. These men have made mistakes, as I did, but many are trying to rebuild lives on better foundations. There's a certain symmetry to it that feels right. The Riddell trial coverage has been everywhere. Vanessa's testimony was particularly revealing about her father's long history of environmental manipulation. I was just another useful pawn in their operations, though that doesn't excuse my willing participation once I understood what was happening. I don't expect a response to this message. I just wanted you to know that the work you're doing matters, not just in exposing fraud, but in helping create systems where ethical voices aren't silenced. The settlement acknowledgement of your contributions to my career was the minimum you deserved, not the maximum. I see that clearly now. Be well, Morgan." I set the phone down, processing emotions too complex to immediately name. There was no manipulation. In his words, no attempt to elicit sympathy or rekindle connection. Just a recognition of reality and perhaps a genuine attempt at amends. My phone rang, pulling me from reflection. It was Diane Patterson, Greensphere's HR director, who had become another unexpected ally in the aftermath of the scandal. "Julia, I hope I'm not interrupting your conference." "Not at all, just finished my presentation." "Wonderful. I wanted to update you personally. The board approved the whistleblower protection policies we discussed. The anonymous reporting system goes live next month, with direct oversight from Reed's department." "That's excellent news," I replied, genuinely pleased. This had been one of my key recommendations as a consultant, creating mechanisms for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. "They're calling it the Reeves Protocol," Diane added. "Seemed fitting given your role in exposing the aerospace fraud." After the call ended, I stood at the hotel window, looking out over the city lights. So much had changed in a single year. The woman who had once sat devastated on the edge of her bed, destroyed by a text message ending her marriage, felt like a different person entirely. The divorce settlement had indeed left me financially secure, with my share of the offshore accounts providing a comfortable cushion even after legal fees. But the real value had been in the public acknowledgement of my contributions to Morgan's career, which had opened doors I hadn't even known existed. My consulting firm, Reeves Environmental Integrity, now employed 7 people and had a waiting list of clients seeking expertise in detecting and preventing corporate environmental manipulation. I testified 3 more times in the ongoing prosecutions of Greensphere executives, each appearance further establishing my professional credibility independent of the whistleblower narrative. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of self, not as Morgan's wife or support system, but as an environmental scientist with valuable skills and insights. The confidence I now carried into boardrooms and conference halls was built on genuine expertise, not defiance or revenge. Before heading to dinner, I composed a brief reply to Morgan. "Morgan, thank you for your message. I'm glad to hear you're finding meaning in the education program. The ethics conference was indeed a positive experience, particularly connecting with other professionals working to create more transparent environmental practices. I hope you continue to find clarity during this time. Julia." Not warm, not cold, just honest. the same quality I now insisted on in all areas of my life. As I gathered my things for dinner, I caught my reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman, looking back, bore little resemblance to the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal a year ago. This Julia stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her expression confident in a way that came from within rather than being defined by someone else's perception. He had left me for someone he thought was better, someone with connections and status that would advance his ambitions. In doing so, he'd lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his wealth, his future in environmental technology. But I had gained something far more valuable than material assets or professional status. I had gained myself, undiminished, unbowed, and finally seen for exactly who I was. As I stepped into the evening air, I felt not the grim satisfaction of revenge completed, but the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. That, in the end, was the most satisfying victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.